The knock came like a pebble against a cathedral door, small, ordinary, impossible to ignore. Midday heat glazed the windshield, dust lifting in little prayers from the boulevard, when a man with sunburnt palms and an old stadium jacket stepped toward the idling convoy. He cupped his hands like a bowl and tapped the glass again, and the city's noise thinned around the sound. Inside the lead car, the air smelled of leather and diluted sanitizer. The driver's knuckles went white on the wheel. Protocol said to inch forward, let the escort wave him off, let the gate be a gate. But the rear door clicked open. A measured breath, then a shoe met the curb. Ibrahim, who had learned to make decisions before the dust settled, stepped out with his jacket unbuttoned, his chin bare to the sunlight. No slogans, no sirens, just the pulse at his temple and the man's quiet. Cracking voice saying he needed help, not for himself, for a child who could not breathe. The boulevard framed them like a corridor, kiosks painted with lottery slogans, a seamstress threading a needle in the shadow, the green cross of the pharmacy blinking slow as a tired metronome. The man said his name was Amadou. He had been a porter before the cough took his work. His daughter, little Fanta, lay at the hospital half a kilometer away behind a desk and a price. He had knocked on a dozen doors and learned that doors could be walls. There was a number, a sum he could not touch. 60,000 CFA for admission, he said, voice lowering as though money were a ritual best whispered. The clerk had showed him a ledger, a thick book with columns like prison bars. No deposit, no bed. He had sold his phone. He had promised a goat he did not own. He had held the child against his chest so she might hear his heartbeat and remember how to breathe. A thin breeze lifted the corner of a torn poster on the fence. Droit à la santé, the words peeling like dried paint. The convoy's second vehicle idled, a miniature storm of diesel under chrome. Ibrahim's aide, Hawa, stepped out with a folder hugged against her ribs, the faint map of a spreadsheet on the top sheet. She had walked through the same hospital last week and seen the queue bent like a river around the admissions desk. The driver glanced at the motorbike courier zigzagging through traffic with a styrofoam cooler strapped to the back. Red letters spelling urgent. Somewhere a muezzin stitched afternoon into a thread of notes. Somewhere a radio host was counting the price of onions. The city went on, but the knock hung in the air, a bell you can't stop hearing. Ibrahim asked Amadou where the child was now. In a chair, the man said, not even a bed. They had given her a small plastic cup and told her to wait, and the word wait bounced between the curbside and the hospital door like a stone in a tin can. The aide's pen touched paper, then stilled. The driver said, quietly, as if confessing, there was an alternate entrance, a back way. If they took it, the hallway that smelled of bleach and breath would open. The escort expected movement, the choreography of authority. But Ibrahim looked at the man's hands. Scars crosshatched the palms like dry riverbeds. He saw in those lines the map of a system where the first touch was not care but cost. Hawa's phone buzzed. A WhatsApp message from a nurse she trusted. Hawa, that morning's shift. Emojis drowning in apology. Deposit rules tighter, the message read. New supervisor watching. Behind Hawa's shoulder, the guard at the hospital gate had a badge clipped too tight, his shirt button strained. He was the system made flesh. Polite, rigid, tired of being yelled at by desperate people. A life can pivot on a breath, and you could hear theirs. Amadou's ragged, Hawa's clipped, Ibrahim's even, the guards rehearsed. Ibrahim asked the driver for a minute and told the escort to kill the sirens they hadn't turned on. The city exhaled. He nodded once at Hawa, who was already dialing. The decision was not yet a policy, not yet a law, not even yet a sentence. It was a footstep, then another toward the gate. The knock had begun as an interruption. It became a summons. Ibrahim set his palm on the cool hood of the car as if to ground himself in metal before touching paper. He asked Amadou to walk with him. The guard straightened. The dust turned gold at their ankles. The distance from curb to threshold could be measured in meters or in years of habits, and the only way across was to keep walking. The door ahead was glass clouded by fingerprints. The ledger inside was waiting open, and the child's breath counted time. Inside, the hospital coughed up its own rhythm. The squeak of a gurney wheel, the click of a triage nurse's pen, the soft grief of a lullaby hummed by a grandmother in a plastic chair. Ibrahim's shoes met the tile with a firm quiet. Amadou's steps were softer, as if he feared scuffing something he could not afford. At the admissions desk, beneath a sign that said, Payer d'abord, the obstructive official, Mr. Cabaret, according to his laminated badge, held court with a fountain pen and a calculator whose solar strip was cracked. The ledger lay open like a law. Columns labeled nom, motif, versement, sold. There was a date stamp sweating red ink onto a stack of receipts. A small plastic tray said depot minimum 60,000. On the wall, a poster warned against bribery while winking away in the heat. Awa, the nurse with an honest spine and a quick, careful smile, spotted them from her station. She tugged the mask from her chin and called out that a child with retractions had been waiting 90 minutes. She made her plea in the rhythm of practice. Skin warm, breathing shallow, lips duskier than they should be. The desk clerk flicked his eyes toward her, then back to the ledger, tapping the pen in a metronome of denial. The guard hovered near the doorway, a hinge in human form, the weight of orders keeping him in place. He would not move unless moved. Hawa showed a letterhead that should have mattered, the insignia of Ibrahim's office, clean type naming a routine site visit. Cabre's gaze slid over it as if it were a bus ticket. He recited the policy in a tone meant to end conversations. Without deposit, no file. Without file, no doctor. Without doctor, no treatment that leaves a trace. Days earlier, a mother had walked away with a child still wheezing because she could not make paper turn into air. It wasn't cruelty, he would later claim. It was procedure. Procedure was a door that made him important and safe, a gate he could lock with a stamp. His fingers hovered over the stamp now, ink drying in the pad, edge polished by use. Amadou stepped forward in a sudden bravery that looked like desperation. He laid 3 crumpled notes on the counter, then a handful of coins. 32,000, maybe, if the coins counted for full humans. He had a scribbled IOU signed by a neighbor, an offer to pay after harvest, a promise dated like a prayer. Cabre's pen didn't touch the paper. He tapped the depot minimum placard with the pen's cap, a little precise hammer. Awa put her hand on the desk as if willing the wood to become soft. She spoke the language of corridors. She could get the child oxygen in 30 seconds if the paper would look away. The security guard's radio crackled with a complaint about a parking space. The system, like a chest too tight to fill, held its breath. Ibrahim felt the room's eyes slide and resettle. He had been in rooms like this, where power pretends to be an object. A book, a stamp, a laminated rule, and people hide inside it to avoid the shame of deciding. He did not raise his voice. He asked a question instead. If a patient stops breathing at the counter, does the ledger sign itself? The joke wasn't funny. It wasn't a joke. The clicking pen went still. Somewhere in the building, a generator hiccuped and caught. The lights flickered, a reminder that even the building was on a borrowed inhale. Hawa's phone buzzed again, a photo from Awa taken before they approached. A small girl in a yellow dress, chin tipped back to catch air that wouldn't settle. The message had a timestamp and the words, "Still waiting." Hawa slid the phone across the counter. The image didn't blink. Cabre swallowed. He had a supervisor upstairs who had promised to clean the ledger by year's end, which meant fewer stories like this staining the columns. Clean meant paid. Clean meant measurable. Clean meant a bonus line on a payslip. The perverse incentive sat there like a coin pressed under a glass, visible, immovable. It turned care into a market, urgency into a negotiation. Amadou's voice thinned to a thread. He said the girl's name again, Fanta, as if names were keys that might turn the lock. In that moment, Ibrahim remembered a clinic his mother had taken him to when he was small, the way the nurse had put a hand on his forehead before touching any paper. First the breath, then the bill. He looked at Awa and saw the same order of care waiting for permission to exist. He nodded once, the kind of nod that moves doors. He told Awa to take them to the child. The guard shifted, the hinge squeaked, and the door held. Procedure, like old habit, resisted the hand. What happened next felt like tugging at fabric that had been stitched wrong for years. Ibrahim walked around the desk. Not fast, not loud. He placed his palm on the ledger, not to defy it, but to mark it. He said, with the authority of a signature spoken aloud, that treatment would be provided now, and invoices would find their owners later. Hawa wrote the instruction on a blank sheet with a thick pen that bled through to the table, a sentence that looked more like a promise than a policy. Hawa lifted the rope at the side of the desk and beckoned Amadou through. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. A seam opened in the room's tight weave. The breathless child was now a destination, not a condition. The desk clerk's lips pressed thin around words that had kept him safe. He watched them cross into the corridor and knew that something old had just been asked to end. They found Fanta in the overflow waiting room, the air warm with a crowd's exhalations, the posters curling at the corners with humidity. Her little chest worked like a bellows, ribs laddering under the yellow dress. Awa kneeled without fuss, a hand to the forehead, 2 fingers at the wrist, the sort of touch that says the body comes before its paperwork. She told another nurse to fetch the portable oxygen and a nebulizer that always needed coaxing. Amadou hovered not at the threshold now, but at the edge of the bed, whispering that her name meant beautiful, as if the word could widen airways. Hawa stood back with a stillness practiced from long meetings, making space for care to be visible. Ibrahim watched the room determine its own hierarchy: breath, then politics, pulse, then ledger. The machine complained, then complied. Oxygen passed through a filter that hummed like a small refrigerator. Hawa counted breaths, then minutes, then watched the blue tint retreat from the child's lips. She explained what she was doing as if speaking to the room itself, as if Cabaret in the doorway needed to understand that numbers can describe a life but cannot replace it. Over her shoulder, the skeleton of the old policy rattled in habits. An orderly, hearing there was no file, began to note down names on scrap paper in case he needed to compile a retroactive case. A receipt book lay open on a counter like a conjurer's trick. White copies on top, yellow below, pink, a faint blush at the bottom. Hawa ignored it. She adjusted the mask. She told the mother, arriving now with a bundle of clothes and a prayer in her pocket, to hold the child's hand. The intervention was not cinematic the way dramas like to cut it. There was no shouting, no shoving, only a rearrangement of sequence so simple it felt like sacrilege. The doctor on call, a woman with tired eyes and clean nails scrubbed red at the bedsides, stepped in and asked who had authorized bypassing admissions. Ibrahim said he had. She tilted her head in a calculus that ran faster than speech and nodded. The room exhaled. Awa called for salbutamol. Someone found a mask, the right size. The generator kept its steady, apologetic purr. The guard inched closer, not to block, but to watch. The way someone who has always stood at the door moves into the entryway to feel the new grammar of the building. Ibrahim's presence did not replace procedure. It revealed its misordering. Hawa quietly asked Awa what the main obstacle was when emergencies arrived. Hawa did not look up as she said it. Fear of reprimand. The clerk controlled the stamp. The stamp controlled the shift. The shift controlled how nurses were judged when auditors tallied the day. There had been a memo last year, signed in perfect penmanship, that tied departmental clean ledgers to quarterly allowances. Clean meant fewer unpaid cases. Would they look the other way now? Awa's mouth tightened. She knew how to move within systems that keep their breath shallow. In the corridor, a cluster formed around the news that a man from the convoy was standing by the desk with his hand on the ledger. The community finds a leader the way water finds a level, through whispers, tells, a certainty in how a person uses a door. A woman with a market apron, Madame Coita, who had come to refill her husband's arthritis prescription, told a boy on a motorbike to spread the message to the neighborhood WhatsApp groups. Something is happening at the hospital. In the foyer, a young tech with a lanyard that said IT support opened a laptop and, half for himself, half for luck, began to sketch a table with columns labeled door to oxygen, unpaid cases, complaints resolved. He didn't know what would come of it, but he knew what data looked like when it wanted to breathe. Awa's voice softened. She asked Fanta questions about her favorite color, about the note painted on the wall of her school where a dove flew with a branch. Children sometimes return to breath faster when they're anchored to breath's reasons. Fanta blinked and said blue. Awa pointed at the sky, visible through the high window, a sliver cut by a dangling power line. They counted slowly together. Breath is countable and miraculous in the same second. The monitor beeped a steadier beat. The mother's shoulders lowered to a normal height. Amadou let out a breath that had been a fist in his chest since morning. Ibrahim stepped out of the room and back to the admissions desk. He didn't need to stay to make himself important. He needed to rearrange the building's first sentence. He asked Caboret for the ledger again. This time the man's fingers released the spine more easily. The book was heavy in the way old orders are heavy. Ibrahim flipped to today's date. Names filled the page. Next to some, a diagonal line slashed through Solde, a sign that someone had paid enough to be treated like a citizen. Next to others, the column lay blank as a held breath. He asked how many had been turned away since sunrise. The clerk, reflexes still stubborn, said he didn't count the invisible. Hawa made a mark. One for the child now in room B, another for a woman with bleeding gums who had gone home to save up. A number began to appear on paper where once there had been only shrugs. He did not promise to pay every bill. He did not promise to fire every obstacle. He promised to write a rule that would keep doors open in the hour when breath is bargaining. He asked Hawa to call the director. He asked Awa what wording would make sense to people who do not live in memos. Treat first, bill later, she said, as if discovering a lost proverb. He said it aloud, so the corridor could hear it, so the guard could rehearse it, so the clerk could practice the shape of it on his tongue. The words settled in the hospital like a new floor laid over cracked tile. Not yet nailed down, but already steady underfoot. Outside, the convoy stayed put. The city kept moving. Inside, a building practiced a new way of taking its next breath. By evening, the hospital's hum had matured into a question. What exactly had been happening in the breathless hour between the gate and the bed. Ibrahim asked for the files that papers generate when life is sorted by stamps. Hawa sat with the director, a sensible man with a precise mustache and tired pride, and requested 4 things that data could give and people could not deny: the admissions log for the past 30 days, the receipt books in sequence, the CCTV clips of the admissions desk between 7 a.m. and noon, and the WhatsApp exchanges in the staff group about deposits and exceptions. The director hesitated only at the last. Hawa assured him that names could be masked in public, that truth didn't require spectacle. The IT tech with the lanyard, whose name turned out to be Idrissa, pulled cables like a magician and set a monitor on a side table. Its screensaver blew like the child's word. The logbook looked innocent in daylight, off-white, onion skin thin, the edges rough where fingers had worried them. It listed 9 admissions. Next to each, a number in the deposit column marched like soldiers. Hawa ran her finger down the page and paused on entries where the number was struck through or rewritten. "That was the ledger speaking back," she said, "and the ledger speaks in hesitation." Once Idrissa layered the CCTV timestamps over the entries, a story exact in its cruelty appeared. At 09:14, a man with a baseball cap argued. At 09:18, the clerk stamped a receipt without taking money. At 09:19, the man disappeared down the corridor with the receipt in hand. At 09:33, a nurse wrote an IOU on a sticky note and folded it into the ledger. At 09:57, a woman with a baby walked in, stood for 2 minutes, and left with her shoulders up by her ears. No line captured that leaving. A building does not record departures from its care as data. It calls them silence. Hawa wrote one unseen denial next to 09:57 and underlined it. The staff WhatsApp group, when screenshots began to gather like clouds, was an education in how systems speak when no one is watching. You could see the anxiety cabled through every message. New directive. No exceptions without supervisor signature, someone wrote on Tuesday. A photo of the supervisor's door with a paper sign taped to it, back at 11:30, was replied to with a row of crying, laughing emojis that didn't laugh. A voice note from Awa, compressed into that slightly metallic sound of the app, said plainly that an asthmatic child didn't have 11 minutes to wait for a door to open. A reply from an unknown number used phrases like financial discipline and moral hazard. Idrissa enlarged the screen. Hawa read aloud the sentences that mattered and let the room sit with their weight. Ibrahim kept his hands behind his back and his voice quiet. He asked who designed the policy, who tied clean ledgers to a quarterly allowance. The director, decent and defensive, named a committee. Committees are famous for writing what no one wants to own. Outside, Madame Koita told the women in the pharmacy queue that someone was counting what they'd always known. The rumor reached a local radio producer with a battered recorder, who began to ask for verifiable stories. Not gossip, he told a caller. Tickets, times, names. The city learned the difference between grievance and evidence. The difference was a receipt number and the clerk's initials. The difference was a door's timetable. The difference was a breath counted against a clock. Ibrahim did not throw anyone to the crowd. He named the mechanism instead. He explained in a press brief he wrote with Hawa and then read once that a deposit-first protocol designed to stabilize cash flow had, in practice, inverted care. It had given power to petty gates and punished emergencies for being urgent. He showed a slide, files made visible, sins made procedural, and pointed to the perverse link between bonuses and denials. There was a murmur in the room when he said, "Perverse?" that rare word that makes both priests and economists blink. He said money would flow differently tomorrow. He said there would be a rule written on a door that every guard could recite. He did not apologize for running a country like a clinic for an afternoon. He did not apologize for touching the ledger. He did not call names. He called a date. The date was tomorrow. Idrissa built a dashboard overnight in a language both computers and neighbors could read. It had 3 lines, 3 numbers, no decoration. Door to oxygen minutes in the last 24 hours. Denials recorded versus denials suspected, a ratio they would refine. Complaints received and resolved, in a stack that shrank like bread in a warm oven when it was working. He placed the screen above the admissions desk, right next to the Payer de Boer sign, which now looked embarrassed to be alive. The screen took its power from being boring. It refreshed every minute. It did not blink when important people walked by. It announced that the building had learned to count the right things. When a prosecutor's office asked quietly for the files related to one supervisor's sudden wealth, the house with the glittering tiles out by the ring road, Hawa said the audit would speak before prison bars did. When a union rep asked whether this was a pretext to starve departments of funds, Ibrahim said the opposite would become measurable. A ring-fenced emergency pool, topped up according to the number of treat-first cases, audited monthly, summarized in public. Cabaret, summoned by conscience or curiosity, stood under the dashboard and read the 3 lines again and again. He picked up his stamp and felt it turn lighter in his hand, then heavier. He did not know yet whether tomorrow would free him or expose him. He did know the door would not be the same door when the sun came back. The new rule was posted at dawn, printed in a sans serif font on paper too thick to curl, taped to the admissions glass, to the guard's hut, to the pharmacy window. Golden hour protocol, it said in both French and the neighborhood's language. Treat first, bill later. Below the sentence, a simple flow unknown to committees but familiar to mothers. The first connection on the diagram ran from gate to care, not gate to cash. The guard practiced the words under his breath, as if they were a blessing meant to be spoken before any other. Awa arrived 15 minutes early and ran a drill while the waiting room still smelled of disinfectant alone. She stationed a colleague at the door with a stopwatch, a new triage cart within arm's reach, the nebulizer primed. They timed how quickly a patient moved from entrance to oxygen. They repeated the drill until the cart's squeak could be predicted. Embarrassingly simple, Awa said as praise. Money did not disappear. It traveled differently. Hawa sat with the hospital accountant and changed the ledger's grammar. An emergency column appeared next to deposit, and the clerk could enter a 0 without feeling like a traitor. Each 0 triggered an automatic entry into a separate book with a treasury code that sounded like a hymn to people who keep cities upright. ER124. That code meant a claim would go to a central pool, not to favors. A small team in the ministry, nicknamed Breathe, could approve reimbursement within 48 hours. They worked off a cue that Idrissa's dashboard fed them, a conveyor belt of necessity rather than whim. The dashboard itself, mounted and humming, now showed door to oxygen in big digits that a grandmother could read without squinting. The first morning it hovered at 9 minutes. By noon it sat at 6. By evening, with more drills, it found 4 and would not go higher without reason. The perverse incentive that had made clean ledgers profitable was banned with language that left no finger holes for old habits to climb back. No bonuses tied to unpaid accounts. No points awarded for turning breath into backlog. Instead, new allowances matched outcomes that couldn't be gamed without doing the work. Fewer denials, shorter door to help, higher complaint resolution. The complaint channel itself was plastered on posters that did not pretend the system belonged only to those who designed it. A WhatsApp number and a USSD code, both easy, both free. The promise beneath them had a deadline. Acknowledgements in 1 hour, resolution within 72. Awa's phone, like every nurse's, now had a contact saved as resolve. The first week, the messages were messy grief. The second, they became tidy notes that could be counted. The third, silence began to mean satisfaction rather than surrender. Enforcement was not left to mood. An audit team, 2 accountants with their sleeves rolled, 1 former ward matron with eyes that saw under rugs, did surprise visits. They carried not hammers, but mirrors. They compared dashboard lines to reality, receipt numbers to times, cameras to stamps. They met privately with clerks to assure them that honesty wouldn't get them fired. They recommended one prosecution where cash had taken a detour into a tiled kitchen. They recommended 4 trainings where fear had made hands heavy on the stamp. Even the guard's hut got a checklist laminated and tucked behind his water bottle. Greet, triage buzzer press, hold door, report exceptions. He kept it like a prayer card. The policy moved beyond the hospital, not by decree, but by contagion. A registry office, where births are made official and fees have a way of erasing names. A school bursar office, where a child's exam results remain behind the counter unless a parent folds a note into a polite thank you. These doors began to ask themselves a hard, basic question: what is the breath here? In the registry, it was legal existence. In the school, it was the right to sit an exam. Each office borrowed the template and drew its own golden hour equivalent. Register first, fees scheduled later, exam seat first, bursar later. The dashboard columns changed names accordingly, door to registration, door to seat. The numbers glowed and embarrassed and then motivated, because there are few things more satisfying than a metric that measures something decent. Ibrahim returned quietly at the end of the week and walked the same corridor. He didn't wave. Doors had learned a new habit and needed no theater. He watched the guard greet a woman with bad knees, press the triage buzzer like a conductor signaling a section, and hold the glass door as though it were heavy with history. He watched Caboret stamp a receipt after care, not before, and write ER124 in neat letters without flinching. He saw Awa run one more drill, smiling when the cart arrived at 3 minutes 30 seconds and calling it a small victory worth a sweet tea. The market woman, Madame Koita, stood under the dashboard and read the numbers as if they were the price of onions. Practical, immediate, affecting dinner. She told the radio host, who told the neighborhood, that the door was breathing differently. Amdo and his daughter left a thank you note shaped like a school composition. Lined paper, careful script. He enclosed the receipt for $60,000, now paid in 2 parts after harvest, with a stamp from a clerk who no longer felt like a gate. He wrote that the window he had knocked on had opened a door for many and that he had found work again unloading sacks at dawn. He said the word breath a dozen times. The letter went into a file that Hawa labeled culture, the kind of file that, if it grows, means a city is healing. Morning returns like a metronome once a system learns its beat. The hospital opens its eyes at 6 to a line that moves. The guard counts without counting. A watchman turned usher. The admissions glass reflects faces, and the rule stuck to it that has yellowed at the edges because it has been there long enough to stop being news. The dashboard above the desk refreshes with a mild flicker. It is boring in the exact way safety should be. The numbers keep time. 3 minutes to oxygen. 2 denials flagged and resolved before sunset yesterday. 6 complaints this week. 5 closed with polite replies, and 1 requiring a visit that Awa scheduled on her lunch break because habit has made it easier than escalation. In other corners of the city, doors have bent toward this grammar. The registry office, where a child's name becomes a paper door, heard the hospital's story and stole its drill with pride. A laminated sheet now hangs under the portrait of a founder. Register first, pay later within 30 days. The old ledger has a new cousin, a simple certificate numbering log that forgives, then records, then reconciles. The bursar's desk at the school with a cracked playground likewise now knows its own breath. Seat the child for the exam. Settle accounts on a calendar that aligns with harvests, not with a bureaucrat's month end. The radio host, a lover of measurement since he learned what they could do to bluster, reads dashboard numbers on Fridays like football scores. He pairs them with small stories that make meaning land. The grandmother who held a triage buzzer like a doorbell and laughed when it worked. The apprentice mechanic who sent a complaint and received a call back within an hour. The clerk who, freed from the fear of losing a bonus, now corrects typos on forms as if quality itself had returned with oxygen. Culture is what policy does when no one quotes it. Hawa visits the hospital once a month without announcing herself and sits where the corridor meets the entry. She watches for the micro gestures that tell her whether the rule is in muscle memory. The way the guard's finger finds the buzzer without looking, the way the triage nurse reaches for the cart before the file, the way the clerk now positions the ledger to the side, as if to show it respects the bed's primacy. She asks Awa what part of the drill has become too easy to skip. They reset it before comfort makes them clumsy. She checks the complaint channel and delights in its production, not to silence, but to routine gratitude. When there is rot, it shows up as a blip on the dashboard. When there is pride, it arrives as a small box of mangoes left at the guard hut with a note that simply says, "Merci pour la porte." The prosecutor did his job exactly once in this story, and it was enough to teach a cautionary lesson without creating a culture of fear. The supervisor, with glittering tiles, negotiated a plea, surrendered a bonus he should never have received, and wrote an apology that got pinned in a staff room, not as humiliation, but as artifact. The remaining officials learned that enforcement is a fence you rarely notice when fields are green and working. The audit team continues their rounds with their mirrors. Their presence keeps the carpet flat. Their reports read in short meetings where no one grandstands because the numbers are unromantic. The treasury pool, tagged with ER 124, hums along as an invisible lung, filling gaps and then filing them without fuss. A line in the national budget now carries its code like a scar that has healed well. As for Amadou, he wakes before the sun and ties a cloth around his waist that once held shame and now holds tools. He breathes a city's air that moved through a system's lungs and came out cleaner than it went in. Fanta walks to school with a backpack that squeaks. A plastic zipper, cheap but determined. She knows the guard's name when she passes the hospital on her way to buy bread, and he knows hers. She waves at the dashboard without knowing why adults love it. She will one day learn that a city's heart can be made visible in numbers that stay small because people keep promises. Ibrahim's car still idles sometimes at that same boulevard, and people still knock. He has learned to listen for the knock that is a summons, not a demand, the sound of a system asking to be reordered. He does not always intervene personally. That would be theater. What matters is that when knocks happen, doors have learned to expect themselves to open. The convoy sirens remain mostly silent, and this is a victory. Alarms are for fires, not for daily breath. The map on Hawa's wall has small green stickers at places where the golden hour template has been stolen and adapted. The stickers cluster like good gossip. If you walk through the hospital now on an ordinary Tuesday, you will see nothing remarkable. A pen scratches, a stamp falls, a door opens, a cart squeaks, a child breathes. A clerk enters ER 124 in neat letters. The dashboard blinks an unremarkable 3. Someone filing jars of tongue depressors hums a pop song under their breath. This is what justice looks like when it grows up. It is boring in the way only the right order can be. The knock at the window has been absorbed into a habit. The ledger sits a little to the side, less a gate than a record. The city has learned to take a breath before it asks for a bill, and the breath has become the culture.